All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of 5 Business Relief Program informational sessions presented by the Wyoming Business Council. My name is Warren Appel. I'm the Agency Services Manager for the Business Council, and I'll be your facilitator today. We're going to cover a few quick housekeeping matters, and then I'll turn things over to Josh to get our presentation going. Written questions may be submitted using the Q&A function on the webinar toolbar. We will respond to these as time allows, but we are going to give priority to those questions submitted in advance. Please do not submit questions via the webinar chat box. Those may get mixed. We are trying to track all of those and make sure we get answers back on them. We remind all participants to keep your microphone muted at all times when you're not speaking and keep background noise to a minimum. This is a courtesy to all of our participants and will also help ensure we have good audio on our recording. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. It will be made available on our website, wyomingbusiness.org, and on the WBC YouTube channel as soon as possible. With that, I will hand you off to Wyoming Business Council Chief Executive Officer Josh Durrell to get us underway. Josh?
Thanks, Warren, and thank you all for joining us today. I know we've got a pretty big audience as I would have expected because we do have a really very interesting and exciting thing ahead of us with this grant program. And really what I want to do first is pay a little bit of a nod to our legislature for putting together a really powerful grant program that will help businesses across the state. Today, we're going to be focusing in mostly on the first portion of that grant program, the $50 million grant for companies with 50 or less employees and up to $50,000 grants. And so we're going to dive into that. But I just want to thank our governor's office as well as our legislature for putting together an extremely generous plan to help small businesses throughout the state. At the time when it was created, I believe it was the largest program in the United States to help small businesses and really intended to make sure that the Wyoming businesses could stay afloat and survive this and come out on the other side as strong as possible. And we know it has been definitely a challenging time for all of our businesses. And we really appreciate everyone being here and everyone willing to take some time out of their day to learn how this business grant program will help you. If we take a look at these, how the business relief programs, sort of the genesis of those, we'll take a look at the timeline. And as many of you knew that through the CARES Act, we were able to secure $1.25 billion in funding from the federal government with some guidance from the Treasury on how that could be spent to help the impact of COVID-19. Very challenging time indeed. And so we're very thankful to our delegation in Washington who helped make that happen. Also, as we moved along, it took a little bit of time to kind of get our ducks in a row and make sure that we were able to utilize that funding in the right way, as well as, again, get that Treasury guidance that is really, really important. So in the middle of May, which was just 2 short weeks ago, our legislature put what I would consider a complete marathon of a legislative session together to decide on some programs that would utilize this CARES Act funding for the businesses and organizations and governments around Wyoming in order to really kind of begin to utilize this money and help really our entire population in Wyoming. And so at that point, we began looking at how would we put this together, because the legislature said the Business Council should execute this program. And then on May 20th, Governor Gordon signed that bill into law. Again, very exciting, made a couple changes that were really to, more than anything, abide by the guidelines given by the U.S. Treasury and ensure that we were spending money in a way that made sense to the Treasury and that was approved by them. And then in just 9 short days, the Business Council took all of that and turned in some rules for this program, which will guide the program and how it is implemented. And our board took those rules and approved them on last Friday. And then now it has gone through the Secretary of State's office and is sitting with the governor's office, and he is reviewing it. And hopefully we'll sign that sometime this week. You are experiencing their first public webinar of this program. And so we are going to be giving a series of webinars this week to help with the application process and help you get the data you need together to take advantage of this program. Before we go on to when that gets started, because it will start this week, I just want to make sure that everyone that's on the line today knows that we want to spread this far and wide. And we want to make sure that the businesses across the state take advantage of it. So in addition to providing the application information, one ask that we have of you today is to make sure that you talk with your peers throughout your community and let them know that if their business is impacted by COVID-19, that they should apply for this program. With $50 million in this program, $225 million in a program coming at the beginning of July, and a third program starting at about the same time of $50 million. That's $325 million that we want to get out to the businesses in Wyoming. And so it would be a travesty if that money had to be sent back to the federal government at the end of the year, which is a possibility if we don't use it up. So please make sure that not only do you apply if your business was impacted, but you let others know as well. So thank you for kind of getting a feel for where we are today. We're going to go through at a very high level the 3 programs that are available in this particular legislation. And then we're going to take a deep dive into what we call Program 1. But Program 1 is for the amount of money that's available is $50 million. It is for businesses that have 50 or fewer workers. The maximum grant that a business can get is $50,000, and it should launch sometime this week. Perhaps we should have called that the 50-50-50 program. Maybe that would be a little bit easier to say, but that's Program 1, and that will start here in early June. Now, one thing I will say is that there are a number of questions surrounding this, but this is available for for-profit businesses. And we'll talk more about that later in eligibility, but just wanted to let folks know right away. Now, programs 2 and 3 will be coming out in the coming weeks, probably toward the beginning of July. A little bit more money in program 2 and a little larger company size and larger grant size as well. Again, that is early July. And then program 3 is really intended to help any company within Wyoming that experienced COVID expenses, and that could be anywhere from a company with 500 employees, and that has a limit of 500,000 people, $500,000, and again, that will launch in early July as well. So stay tuned for those. And as you'll note on the bottom of this slide, just because you've taken advantage of Program 1, it does not exclude you from programs 2 and 3. And we'll go through some examples today to show you that. Looks like there might be a question about the viewer. I want to make sure that the slides are showing. The slides are what's important. My face is definitely not. So Warren, can we make sure that the slide is as large as possible? I apologize.
Sure, Josh, you should be able to pin your spotlight, your video, so that makes it clear for everyone.
Okay. All right. How do I just stop my video, or we just got a note in here from Bruce that says that he's only able to see me rather than the slides. And if that's the case, I don't want that. I would rather people see the slides. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Appreciate that, Warren. And thanks, Bruce, for letting us know. The important stuff is on the slide for sure. But I just want to make sure that people know that you can take advantage of really all 3 programs. And as small businesses in the state, we wanted to make sure that folks didn't slip through the cracks, and you would be able to take advantage of this program as much as possible. So just wanted to make sure that's super clear. So let's take a look at the rules of this program. And one thing I will say as we go through these rules, I think it's important to note, if you've been following the legislation, that there have been some changes since that legislation was passed. Then Governor Gordon did some changes to it and signed it, which was perfectly in line with his ability to do so. And then our job is to take that and make rules around that to further determine eligibility, all of the preferences and the amounts and such, so that it matches up with Treasury guidance, but at the same time, honoring the spirit of the legislation. Now, I will say that the businesses, small businesses that might have slipped through the cracks were definitely the biggest concern of legislation, of the legislators, and making sure that we took care of those businesses on Main Street and throughout our state in order to make sure that they were taken care of first was definitely a key component of that. And so let's talk through the eligibility briefly. So when it comes to eligibility, we're looking at for-profit, privately or publicly owned businesses with a headquarters and or more than 50% of the primary work in Wyoming. You need to have employed 50 employees or less as of March 31st, 2020, and you must have been established as a business on or before enactment of the applicable public health orders. That is generally speaking at the beginning of March. So anyone who started a business in April, for example, is not eligible. And here's the kicker at the end, that you have incurred a loss due to local or state health orders due to COVID-19. Now, that could be our state, it could be other states, but if incurred a loss, the key is that you need to be able to demonstrate that you incurred a loss due to COVID-19 and closures thereabout. In terms of preference, this is a little bit interesting. There are 3 levels of preference. If you did not receive any PPP funding and you were specifically named by a health order, so think restaurants, bars, movie theaters, gyms, personal care, tattoo parlors, those types of things, those particular businesses that did not receive PPP are going to give first priority. And so we will define a certain window of time where those were the applications that will be processed. The next level are those people who might have received PPP, but were also named by the state or local health orders, or those people who did not receive PPP and were not named specifically. So you can kind of think that there are 2 components here. Whether or not you got PPP or whether or not you were closed by an order. And if you got the double whammy, you're in the first batch. If you experienced 1 or more of those hardships, you're in the second batch. And then for all other eligible businesses, you would be in the third batch. And again, we will define the timing at a future date, and you will know when that is. Your grant amount, now this again also follows the Treasury guidance, is the lost business revenue that you experienced from that March 13th timeframe up until you apply for the grant, plus any COVID-related expenses, minus any savings you realized as a result of the closures, minus your PPP funds, if any, or other federal grant funds. Now, we're going to go deeper into that, and Josh Keefe, our finance manager, will explain that a little bit more. And then we're going to work through a number of examples for different types of businesses on how that might work. Number 4 is all about certification. And what I will tell you is that these are some of the main things that you must certify. However, there will probably be a larger list as the Attorney General makes sure that we've taken and covered all of our bases. But I will say this, the goal of this program from the legislators was to get a program that was simple for applicants to work with, we were able to enact it quickly, and we were able to sort of put the onus on those businesses rather than having a bunch of documentation that we review and have a process that could be very onerous in terms of work, but really just let you self-certify and report all of the information that's necessary on the application and trust that people will do things right. Now, knowing that we are going to review and bounce the information that is provided to us off of various agencies within the state to make sure that we are providing this funding to legitimate and real businesses. The last thing that we want to do is have a process that could be exposed to fraud or that could be spoofed in any way. So we're going to be bouncing that off of that. As such, we will review those applications and pass those that match or that pass to the folks at the state auditor's office, and they will run it through their process to either deposit money through EFT or send a check out. And so we would see a timeline of up to 21 calendar days. I hope that it's faster than that, but depends a little bit on the application process. And then finally, there will be random audits performed from time to time. And so it's important for all businesses to make sure that they have documentation to support their grant amounts and to support their application. I look at it a little bit like keeping the receipts you need for taxes, or all of the information you need when you submit your taxes, and just make sure that you have that and the logic therein when you submit this, so that if you are audited, you have that documentation to back it up. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh Keefe, who is going to talk through the grant amount calculation and what is important for that. Thanks. Josh?
All right, thanks, Josh. So yeah, everybody, this is the way that we're going to calculate the grant amount. I am working, just putting the final touches on a worksheet that will also help you to calculate this amount, but also just to walk through a little bit so you understand. So the first category is that lost business revenue category. The idea with that is that the Treasury guidance was very clear in making sure that there were actual costs associated with lost revenue. So for example, maybe you were supposed to do some services, and because things closed down, you lost out on that revenue. Like maybe you had a contract to do that. That would be a lost business revenue opportunity. So what you'd want to do is to capture that amount and make sure that you put it on the worksheet. The next one is COVID-related expenses. So for example, maybe you put up a bunch of signage at your business, directing folks for social distancing. Perhaps you bought more cleaning supplies. Maybe you also bought PPE for your employees. Any kind of expense that is extraordinary, maybe, is the best way to think about it. If you weren't going to normally have that expense in your normal day-to-day operations, you'd want to add that cost that you incurred, again, to the total so far. So the next one is the cost savings that you realized as a result of the closures. So with this one, what we're going to do is we're going to decrease the sum of the first two parts. And with this category, you'll want to think of it as basically cost savings. So if you, for example, had, normally you would, if you were a restaurant, you would get a Cisco truck delivery, twice a week. You would have to pay for those, for that cost of the food to be delivered. But since you've been closed, you are not incurring that cost anymore. So you are therefore saving that cost. And what is going to happen then is that you will have to decrease that from the sum of the first two parts. Maybe another example is if you're a business that decided, hey, we just don't know how this is going to turn out. We're going to cut everybody's hours by 5 hours a week per employee. You know what that full-time 40-hour cost is, but if you cut down to 35 hours per employee, you know that you're saving 5 hours per employee per week. So that's a fairly easy number to come about and to be able to also realize those cost savings because of the COVID-19 emergency. The final category is PPP funds. So if obviously the priority number one is the non-PPP and required folks, but if you fall into the other two priorities, you will have to basically subtract the amount of PPP funds that you have received from that. So I think that's fairly straightforward. Probably most businesses know you had to sign documents to get that money, and so that should be an easy number to come about if indeed you did receive PPP. So we tried not to make it too complicated and hopefully give you some some numbers that were fairly easy to substantiate, because as Josh mentioned, the business council is required to do audits. And so if you as a business can provide the worksheet and basically the supporting documentation and how you got there, that will help with that audit process if you are selected. So.
Thanks, Josh. And just to follow along on that final, subtraction, if you will, of PPP funds, that could be other federal grant funds intended to help with COVID-19. It's not common. However, there are some agriculture-based funds as well as maybe some daycare-based funding that may have helped people in that during that time. And the key is there, we don't want people double dipping, and the federal, the U.S. Treasury doesn't either. So we want to make sure that we subtract that off. And that's the thing. Now, to go through this a little bit more, what we've done is we've taken a look at, and these are businesses that we interviewed and talked with them a little bit about it. Obviously, we're not going to name them, and in some cases, they did some more of a kind of an back of the napkin calculation, and this doesn't necessarily equate to the exact amounts. But we've done some examples here, and we would like to walk through these and talk through some of those things. So the first example is a hotel. They compared their business from 2019 to their business this year from that March 13th timeframe until today, and found that they were down almost $172,000. They had an additional expense in terms of cleaning, shift work, and other equipment and supplies for COVID-19 of $5,500. They recognized a cost savings, and now we'll get into this a little bit more, and it'll be even more clear. But again, because maybe there weren't as many travelers, they were able to cut down their cleaning staff and maybe have a cost savings of about $10,000. Likely, that's mostly payroll. I could imagine that maybe there was some less laundry, and things like that. So there were expenses that were less. So then they also, they did apply for and get PPP. And so for almost $70,000. And so their amount that their maximum could be $98,000. Now, of course, in this first grant program, their maximum would be $50,000. So they could submit $50,000 for that. And if possible, maybe in the future programs 2 and 3, they could apply for even more. So they would apply for $50,000 worth of grants, and that's how that would work. Restaurant, a very similar type of thing. That restaurant had about $133,000 worth of lost revenue based on that same time period, again, from like March 13th all the way through their application date. So they assumed it was today. And then they had an additional set of expenses for, in their case, for things like extra takeout items, extra PPE for their staff, and just extra equipment to manage COVID-19 of about $4,250. They experienced a cost savings of about almost $16,000 because of the fact that they didn't need as much staff on the case. And then they also received PPP for the tune of $47,000. And again, they had more than $50,000, but again, they could not apply for more than that. And so with that, then we move on to a brewery, very similar situation. Now, I'll skip over that one. It's similar to restaurant in some respects, but the retail shop, I think this one could be pretty interesting. They again looked at their business 1 year prior and looked at the amount that they were down, about $75,000. They didn't have much in the way of extra expenses, so that was about $900. But they did have a cost savings because of payroll, less payroll, and a little less inventory of about $4,800. And then their federal grants were, based on their employment, was $68,000. And so they have a grant amount of about $3,000. Now, this next one I think is really, really important because it was a barbershop and a barber. Now, I will say this. I want everyone to remember that sole proprietors are welcome to apply. And you also did not have to be named as a business that was closed directly, but your business had to be impacted. And so many, many businesses were impacted by that. So I don't want people to think, oh, my name wasn't in the health order, so I don't get to apply. You do get to apply. It just depends on whether you were impacted or not. And so let's go through this barbershop example. I think this actually fits really well with a number of the personal care companies that experienced a closure and then have experienced a little bit of a slowdown over the last few weeks as well, even after they've been opened up. So I talked to a barbershop owner today, and he said, you know, during that time, normally I would make about $12,600. And he said, but one thing I didn't do is I did not charge my barbers booth rental. He said, I just decided to make the call and not charge them their monthly booth rental during that time. And so that was a loss for him. Now, in terms of COVID-19 expenses, he had to do extra cleaning upon startup and do a little bit more sanitation supplies. That was about $500. Now, because he was closed, his cost savings was really just an electrical bill was about $50 cheaper. And so I said, you know, I appreciate your honesty and I think that that's appropriate. So that was a bit of a savings, and he reported it. And then because of the nature of his business, he did not apply for PPP. And so his, he subtracted 0 for PPP. So now his business is eligible for about a $13,000 grant. Based on those figures. Now we looked at a barber in his same shop and said, okay, well, a barber would have had about $7,000 in lost revenue. They didn't really have any COVID-19 expenses to speak of to do their business. And then they did have a cost savings because they didn't have to do booth rental. They actually had a savings of about $900. Again, they were a sole proprietor. They did not apply for PPP. And so they subtract 0 for that. And they're eligible for about $6,000 based on that calculation. And so hopefully that gives everybody a flavor for the ways to calculate that. Now, of course, these are sort of rounded numbers and in some cases back of the napkin calculations. And you're going to want to, you know, substantiate these, make sure that you have the documentation that will help you go through these 4 elements. And just make sure that you keep that along with the worksheet that Josh Keefe will be providing in the future so that you can really have that all substantiated and prepare yourself if there were to be a random audit. Okay. And I know we'll have a few more questions on that. If we need to cover them, I'm happy to at the end. But with that, we're going to go ahead and pass the baton, if we will, to Kim Porter, who has a way to look at the application process and walk us through that. Kim, I believe you should be able to share your screen. I think I might have to stop sharing mine and allow you to share yours. And while she's getting that open, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of this application. Again, we wanted to keep it really simple, in tune with the legislation, and we wanted to make it so that you didn't have to upload any documentation and us review all of that. Okay? All right. Well, Kim, take it away.
Right. Very cool, Josh. Thanks so much. Today, I'm going to give a very high-level overview of the application. We're not going to go through every question. One of the things that we tried to do is make this application quick, secure, and positive. And there's a number of items that are built into the application that should make it very easy. We also are in the we're preparing a manual right now that will walk people through it if they have any questions, and we'll have some customer service people available to provide any help. So when you go to our website, wyobizrelief.org, you'll scroll down to the bottom of the screen and there will be an Apply Here button. It's big and red, and it will take you to a Logon screen. And I'm not going to show that today, but the Logon screen has very detailed information for getting into the system. So if you have an account with us, you'll just have to sign into your account. And if you're new, then there's a button where you'll be able to sign up for an account. You'll get an email that'll walk you through getting your password set up and different things like that. And you'll come to this very first screen. The application has 2 screens. This is a short one, and then there's a longer one. And some things to note on here is as you're filling this out, there are these gray buttons with an I in it for information. And so if you need a little bit more information about what we're asking, there's some detail you can click on the I and get a little more detail. The other thing we've done to make this easy for businesses to apply is on the right-hand side of the screen over here, we have these inverted triangles. And if you click on those, there's pull-down menus. And in the pull-down menu, there are a lot of different options to help you. And then if something doesn't fit, there's always an other option. So those are 2 things that'll help you out when you're filling out the application. This very first screen is all about qualifications and priority. So all of these are asking you questions about, was your business established before the health order? How many employees? Different stuff like that to make sure you qualify. When you hit this confirm button, if there are any challenges, it's going to give you this big red screen or big red notice at the top, this box, and it'll highlight what we don't like. And so like, for example, I put in 78 employees in here. And so it's telling me to qualify for the program, I have to have 50 employees or less. So at least 1 employee, but 50 employees. Then it's going to take you into the second part of the screen. And there's a couple things that are really helpful on this screen. For one, you'll notice some of the fields are going to autofill with things from the first screen to make it easier for you. Our recommendation on this is just to go through each one of the questions and make sure that you answer each question. So the first one autofills for you. Then the second one, and you got to double click to get in here. You can see by the arrow over to the right that this is going to be a drop-down menu. The other thing that will be really helpful is if you fill out the business interruption worksheet before you get this started, you'll have the information that you're going to need. If you know your W-9 information, so if you know your legal business name and your employer ID number or your social security number, if you have that information and it matches the IRS information, that'll make your application go quicker. One thing I do want to point out is in this area right here, right after the describing your business, in this area, if you have an employer identification number, you enter that. If you don't, then you can enter your social security number. I really think as far as a high level goes, that's probably most of it. I'll just kind of scroll down here. You'll see that there's different areas. And like I said, if you just kind of go through and tab through and make sure you fill everything out. When you get to the bottom, you do have the opportunity to have the system check your application. So you can click on this box. I am ready to validate my application. And I don't know what's going to happen here. It's probably going to give me, when you fill everything out, if you only have an error or 2, you're going to be able to click in you're going to see your arrow and you'll be able to click in this. It'll be underlined and it'll take you to where there's a problem in your application. And then if you simply hit the save button, you can validate it again. And what you're looking for is right here where it says completeness, not yet verified. What you're looking for is your application is complete. And then when you're done with that, there are some statements that you need to certify. You'll put your signature in here. That'll be your electric signature title. And when you hit next, it'll submit your application. And so, like I said, we tried to make that really easy. And that's, I think most people aren't going to have much problem filling this out. That's what I have for you.
Great, thank you, Kim. And I agree. I think the legislature was very clear. They definitely wanted to make sure that the application process was simple and they wanted to make sure that people were able to do this without super complex math. Although whenever you're developing a program of this type and trying to do it with speed and a very broad applicability, it's really difficult to understand all of the nuances. And so with that, we are going to get, I'm sure, a number of questions today, and we'll be able to answer those. And we'll do our best to answer all of these questions in our frequently asked questions section so that we can make sure that it's as clear as possible for everyone. So with that, I'm going to jump to the next slide so that people can understand all of the details and where to go for as much information as possible. You are in the first batch of the public webinars. And so one thing I will say is that we are going to continue to get good questions from our audience. We are going to continue to get information that we want to be able to provide out. And so continue to go to wyobizrelief.org. That website is up on your screen there now, and check out the frequently asked questions. That's where you will apply. You will get all of our resources there for that program. I would also suggest that everyone registers to receive Wyoming Business Council press releases, because we'll continue to communicate information about these programs via that method, and we want to make sure that you have the ability to do that. So in addition to signing yourself up, if you could make sure that you encourage other business owners in your community to do the same, I think that would be really, really powerful. Also, we want to let you know that there are a number of partners in our that are working with us in order to help people out. We know that it takes a lot to do this, and you might want some help or some questions. So reaching out to your Wyoming Business Council Regional Director or the Small Business Development Center Regional Directors is a great way to do just that. All right, we'll jump to this next slide here. So let's take a look at the upcoming webinar so people can stay informed. Again, we've got them early in the morning and in the afternoon each day. Hopefully you're able to work in the interim, but take some time to understand these webinars. The webinars are going to be essentially the same each day, so don't feel like you have to watch all of them leading up to the launch of the application. You should be able to get everything you need today and during our question and answer. If you need to pop back in and get something from our FAQ, please feel free to do so. I would like to say that we have, again, as I mentioned, some partners with the Small Business Development Center, as well as our own regional directors, expertise out there. But I do also want to let you know that the banks around the state have offered to help with any questions you might have. The Economic Development Association, the Chambers of Commerce, Association of Municipalities, and the county commissioners have all really been good partners, as well as Manufacturing Works, to help businesses make sure that they can go through this very simple application process in a very fast and effective way. Here are a number of our regional directors. Many of them you already know. But if you need to reach out and ask any questions, these folks can be tremendous resources for you and give you the information that you need to help with that application process. And really with that, we're at a spot now where we can dive in and start answering some of the questions that you have. And we do have quite a number of questions. We're going to do our best to get to them all. If you could please type those into the question and answer portion of the webinar rather than asking them verbally, that would be very helpful. So please type those in, and we will begin looking through some of these questions. And Warren, with that, I'm gonna just kind of take a look through some of these, if you don't mind. So I will. You know what? There is the first things first. This is a great question from Mr. Patel, I believe. It says, ours is a hotel operation which was not closed, but due to COVID-19 restrictions, they had about 10% occupancy during the first 5 months of 2020. And he's looking for a detailed list of documentation that's required with the Program 1 application. So great question. So we're only looking at a time frame from March 13th until you apply. That's based on the Treasury guidance, and it's also something where we can't forecast ahead and we can't pay for any expenses or loss of business prior to that time frame. However, the question that I'd like to dive in on here is the documentation needed. And this is actually a really challenging question in some ways, because there isn't a lot of guidance on it. What I will tell you is this: if you have data from last year, from the March 13th till you apply timeframe, utilizing your lost revenue from last year at that time to this year at that time is a great way to utilize and have that documentation available. Now, you don't need to submit that documentation. You just need to make sure that you can refer back to it if you are audited. Okay. So great question. Now, there are some other businesses that might use backlog to indicate that, lost contracts to indicate that they have lost business revenue. Those are things that are that you would want to keep with you so that you could prove and substantiate that you did lose business. The one thing you don't want to do is say, oh, well, I was about to have a great year until COVID and let me just wing it. It needs to be substantiated with paper and not just guesstimates. Okay. So hopefully that covers the next question, which is revenue losses based on what? It is actual for 2019 versus what you did in 2020. So taking a look back as well. And this is a great question. It's about new businesses. It says, how will new businesses be expected to estimate revenue losses if they've only been open for 6 months? Wasn't fully open to the public until March 1st. This is a challenge. Frankly, there isn't a great way for us to do that. And so what I would suggest you do is have your own mechanism for doing that. It could be, if you've got, say, 6 months of data to show, use an average of that and prorate it across that time period. Have something to substantiate it. We realize that in order to come up with a program that helps really, really quickly and helps the businesses across the state in a broad way, we weren't going to be able to nail down all of the exact nuances across that business spectrum in a very short amount of time, and keeping it very simple. So what I would suggest in those cases is trying to find, maybe work with a small business development center representative or a business council representative or a bank to say, how should I do this? And what would be some normal ways of doing it? And I think sometimes your banks can help with that as well. Let's see, Betsy asks a really good question. Licensed childcare programs will be receiving a one-time subsidy through DFS and WYO Kids First using CARES dollars. Is this something that needs to be subtracted out of their grant applications? And yes, it is. And the Treasury is pretty specific about not utilizing Treasury funds to pay for something twice. And so if you know what those are, you're going to need to remove those. I believe daycares and ag might be the ones that have more than PPP to subtract out of that. So that's a great question. In the rules, it does state any additional federal funding that you expect to not repay. So another question from Matt, just to confirm, are laid off employees considered cost savings if we would have had them on a normal summer? So this is a good question. Just like we estimated our revenue, so we compared maybe last year from that March timeframe till the end of May timeframe in 2019 on our revenue, we would also want to do the same with our expenses. And so when you compare, maybe you take a look at your expenses in March through May of 2019 and compare it to 2020, that is your cost savings that you would experience if you had laid off a number of people. So hopefully that clears that up. That can be a little bit confusing. So let's see. This is a great question. So our business from Perry, our business is seasonal. We normally open on May 1st due to the national parks being closed until the 18th of May. We did not open until the 22nd. We had some employees working to prepare for opening, but did not have 100% staff until the 22nd. How would the month of May be for us be eligible for grants? Is there a formula for seasonal businesses? There's not necessarily a formula for seasonal businesses. And again, we recognize that this is a challenge, and those seasonal businesses represent a big portion of Wyoming's economy. And it's going to be challenging through the summer. But the Treasury guidance allows us to only look at what has happened from that March timeframe until the time you apply. You cannot project forward. So what I guess, Perry, what I would say is that you would utilize any data you have from this May versus last May, or look at it from just that May timeframe, not anything obviously moving forward. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Here is a question from PJ asking about the calculation period and how that will change for programs 2 and 3. 6 Wyoming locations and receive. Boy, this one might actually be one we take offline, PJ, and try to work with you specifically. It might be a little bit confusing and not come over very well on the webinar. So we will reach out to you specifically and work through that. I think it's a great question and one that we'll definitely answer and then post on our website as well. So if a hotel lost existing tourism reservation due to canceled tours, will any of that lost revenue be eligible for the grant? So this is a great question. Lost orders. Now the key here is it can't be verbal orders. It needs to be based on contracts. And you need to show that those were canceled and it's on paper, not just in verbiage. We had a contractor who was asking, hey, I had a whole bunch of people talking about building houses and now nobody's talking about it. Can I utilize that? And unfortunately you cannot. However, if you have contracts that were canceled, and that would be considered lost revenue. Let's see. So here's a great question from Rob. He asks, what if you laid your employee off before March 13th due to slowdown in revenue before it really hit? If you had no employees, do you still qualify? Yes, because Rob, you are still considered an employee and your business is still considered a business in that case. Crystal asks a good question about when the application will be available and where will I find it? So we are hoping the middle of this week. It'd be great if it was Wednesday afternoon, but we're working through the final details and it may not be Wednesday afternoon. So we're saying middle of this week to launch that application. And you will find that on wyoBizrelief.org. That's wyoBizrelief.org. Oh, let's see. A few of these questions are rather long and detailed, and we'll probably have to answer those separately and then post the answers on our website. Mel Shumway asks, is the application is not ready to use? That is correct. It is not quite ready yet. It will be ready for prime time later this week. Dee asks a really good question about authorized uses for the grant money as noted in a few places here. So in this particular stipend, in this particular grant, there are no you do not have to track the way you use that money. It is not required. Now in programs 2 and 3, it is required that you track the way you spend that money, and it is for certain items. However, this portion was intended to be much less prescriptive than something like the PPP. And it was something that was intended to be very flexible for the businesses. And again, reaching those small businesses, knowing that there are many different flavors of small businesses and the spectrum is very broad. So we wanted to make it easy and not have to track the spending of these dollars. Okay. So Kelly Donahue asks a question about program rules and concerned about the 3-year maintaining. What if our business goes down again before the 3-year mark? That's a good question. And I don't have the exact, I believe it is intend. I think the intent of that particular part is to ensure that somebody isn't already closing down and bails out right away. So I can get you a better answer and put that into the FAQ, but I believe it is mostly about the intent of that and that you continue to try to keep your business open. Again, we want businesses to stay open in Wyoming. We want those businesses that are parts of our economies in our local communities to continue to try every effort to stay open and stay moving forward. And we hope that this money can be used to really maybe kickstart something new or help you, get into a way to handle this particular crisis that maybe you hadn't done before. And while the word pivot is used a whole lot, I think it is can be a really powerful concept here. An anonymous attendee said, if I started my business on September 1st, how do I determine my loss? Can I compare revenue from January and February to March through today? And I believe that you can. That to me makes some sense, to utilize that revenue as what your monthly revenue might have been, and do it that way. Let's see. So Sean asks a question about the application. And I just want to, there was some verbiage about the period beginning March 27th, 2020 and ending on December 31st, and did not receive a loan under the Federal Payroll Protection Act. That is, it doesn't, you can still apply if you get the PPP. It just changes your priority in the list, and it subtracts off that dollar amount. So you can still apply if you received PPP. You'll just apply either in the second or third priority. So hopefully that answered that. Karen asks a really good question about two businesses under the same corporation, which I'm guessing is the same EIN. Each has less than 50 employees, but together they have more than 50. Can each business apply separately, or can the corporation apply only once? I believe that the answer is that under the same EIN, you can apply only once. And if you're more than 50, you would need to apply in that second program that is up to 100 employees, and but again has a much larger grant amount. So we can confirm that, Karen, but I believe that is going to happen in the next program of those businesses that have less than 100 employees. Will asks a good question about his business looking at future 4 weeks. He said, my business is down by 50% in April, and April business was down 60%, March was down 25%. Do future 4 weeks count? And unfortunately, Will, they do not, unless you're working on like maybe a backlog or something like that. But you cannot predict into the future, just because the Treasury guidance is based on that time frame from March until the application is processed. Let's see. There's a question again from Karen. I think this is a good one as well. Is the employee count actual employees or full-time equivalents? That's a fantastic question, and I don't have the answer right with me right now, but I will get the answer to that and be able to present that on the FAQ and back to you separately, and make sure that it is known how that is counted. Let's see, we've got quite a few questions here, but we have 7 minutes left. So thank you all for your patience and for sticking around. A great number of you, almost 200 people are here listening to this. So that's good news. Make sure we spread this out for our other businesses in the state. So if you had employees last year but did not have any employees due to laying off before March 13th, do you still subtract employees' wages as a cost savings? The answer, Rob, is that yes, you still need to compare. If you're looking at last year's time frame in terms of revenue, we need you to compare that with the expenses and rectify it that way. So you still would consider that a cost savings. This is a question that has happened a couple times, and I don't know if we've been clear about this, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head. It says, if a business owner is self-employed but have qualified for unemployment, should the unemployment be subtracted as a grant? Let me make sure, that's been asked a couple times. Let me make sure that we get a good answer to that question. And once we have that answer, we'll reply back to you and post it in the FAQ. Fantastic question. Donna asks a great question about PPP. So one of the things that Donna asks is, we don't expect all of our loan to be forgiven as we didn't use the entire amount. Do we use the amount loaned or estimate the amount to be forgiven? Now, this is a great question, and you should estimate the amount to be forgiven. Now, for many people, they're going to use it all up. Many people are not, because of the way their expenses are or their payroll is. And so you should estimate the amount to be forgiven. But just remember that that's something that is sort of easily checked, and it's something that you'll want to make sure that you are conservative on and accurate on as best you can. Great question. Let's see. There is another question about the portion of idle loans that was advanced, and that is something that I don't know. I know the spirit of the program is to subtract off any grants, things that you did not expect to be repaid. However, I don't know how the idle advance is calculated, and so we are going to have to get a little bit more clarification on idle advance. But a great question out there about idle advance and whether that should be deducted or not. The time period to calculate lost revenue, and this will be specified in particular in the worksheet, but it is March 13th, I believe was when all of those orders went into effect. Another question about counting FTEs, whether that's equivalents or heads. So we'll get some more clarity on that one. That's a great question. Here's a question about someone who is a photographer. I look at this, maybe we'll generalize this a bit. I'm a photographer who relies heavily on Little League sports. I don't have contracts with the leagues to cancel as I deal directly with parents. I can only ballpark that loss in revenue. Will that qualify as a loss? I think what you could do is show the amount of money that you made last year during these Little League, the Little Leagues, and then utilize that versus this year and show that loss. Again, I think we had some good questions on the application. I want to just make it clear that the application is not finalized yet. It is not 100% done. So there are going to be some things that if you look really closely at it, may not make some sense at this moment, but will by the end of, or by the time it's launched. So great question. Jill asks if the webinar is going to be recorded. It is going to be recorded, and we will also be performing webinars at 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. each day this week, and then we will have more later as well. It'll be available, I believe, on wyobizrelief.org. You'll be able to find the recordings there. Matt asks a question about, will you be funding the full requested amounts for each grant application that comes in, or is it possible you will only fund a percentage of the total requested amount? For example, if we apply for $35,000 and qualify, will we get all $35,000, or might it only be $21,000? That's a good example. Matt, that's a great question. The intent of this is to fund you in the amount that you can, again, substantiate and that you ask for. It is one of those things where we think that the priority will ensure that the businesses that it was really intended to help it will help them. And so we will be funding at the amount of a grant that you request. That might mean if we use up all $50 million of this very quickly, that, that some businesses don't get that, but we will be funding at the requested amount. Let's see, I'm going to keep looking down this list. A bunch of great questions for sure. Somebody asked if is lost accounts receivable included in lost business revenue? That's a great question. I believe so, but we will answer that one for sure and get you the answer to that. That's a really good one. Somebody asked about subsequent webinars having the same content. They will indeed have similar content. Of course, as we answer some of these questions, we'll be able to provide that data back with much more certainty, as I'm sure that there are people out there that will ask the same questions that you are asking. So here's a question about the different multiple phases. Oh, it looks like we're a minute over. So I'll count this one as my last question. I want to make sure that we respect everyone's time. But I want to also let you know that we will be looking at these questions, getting you answers, and providing those on the FAQ. I think this one is a really good question by Lee. It says, if qualified in phase 1 as an example for the max of 50K and can still apply for phase 2, can the phase 2 max of 300K be achieved if qualified? And what I will say is that in the legislation, the program 2 does take into consideration the amount that you got. It allows us to take into consideration the amount that you got in phase 1. So it's possible that it will be a 300K total, not 350,000. And so we're developing the rules for that, and more clarity will come out later. But again, I think to take advantage of this first program, if you can, begin, because as we mentioned, there are very, very few restrictions on the way you can spend this money, and the eligibility of it is such that you should hopefully take advantage of it as soon as you can. And with that, again, great questions, fantastic audience. I really appreciate that. Hopefully we've cleared some things up. We realize, again, that in a case like this, where we have almost every business across Wyoming, and we're developing a program for every business, we realize there are going to be some nuances. We also realize that with this kind of speed, we're not going to make it perfect. It's not going to be a perfect system. And so we want to really, deliver on the intent of the legislature and the governor's office, which is, let's get a program out there that helps our small businesses make it through and get to the next stage of their their lives, and be able to move things forward as much as possible with as little work, but of course staying true to those Treasury guidelines and ensuring that we're being good stewards of the money, but with as little work on the applicant as possible. And so with that, we've developed a program that I think will do just that. Will help businesses across the state. And please stay tuned on wyobizrelief.org for when that application opens and when you will be able to apply. With that, Warren, we'll wrap up the recording. We'll do our best to get it posted as fast as possible. And we thank you all for all of your feedback, your input, and these great questions that will allow us to provide more clarity on this program. So thank you very much, and good luck applying. Thank you.